You're listening to Napa Valley College Now on NAPAbroadcasting.com.
Thanks for joining us here at NAPAbroadcasting.com. For as long as I can remember, people have been asking what goes on at Napa Valley College. No, not the business of educating students, but the sometimes mysterious process of how the college operates. Going all the way back to the 90s and the aughts, there has been or appeared to be a cloak of mystery that surrounds the institution. Justified or not, it's always been the perception. Over the years, candidate after candidate has run for the college board, saying their goal was to improve the relationship between the college and the community. Presidents of the college have promised the same thing. Some, like current college president and superintendent Dr. Kraft, has worked very hard at it. But something always seems missing. For presidents or board members, it's not just about showing up and sharing. It's allowing the public to take a look behind the curtain and understand how Napa Valley College, not unlike the 113 other community colleges around California, really do operate. Napa Valley College and the community colleges in general are not like NVUSD or a traditional public school district with its top-down governance. It's about shared governance, competing interest groups, and a much more complicated and sophisticated level of governance and operation. It's possible that this November a bond issue for the college may appear on the ballot. That decision is yet to be made. But if it does, there's no question that in that campaign you'll hear a lot about the buildings, you'll hear the usual anti-tax groups trashing it, and you'll hear the positive message about how it'll help the students. But before you hear any of it, or even attempt to understand it, it's important that you understand how Napa Valley College operates, its governance, and the process that really brought the bond to the public. In short, pulling back the curtain on the great and powerful Oz. And here to help us do that and to understand that, I am joined by the current president and superintendent of Napa Valley College, Dr. Ron Kraft. Ron, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you very much, Jeff. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. First of all, is it your perception that there is a kind of mystery sometimes, a kind of governance that people just don't understand with respect to how it works, not just here at Napa Valley College, but for that matter, any college and university, and more specifically to the other 113 community colleges throughout the state of California?
You said it. There is a very complicated system in California, and I would say of all the states that have community colleges, which is all of them, the California system is noted for its complexity, its layered versions, and as I like to say, that it's like the immutable laws of the universe, time, space, gravity, and the orbits. That if they can seem completely implausible or unintelligible, but once you kind of get it, you can look at it from a holistic vantage point, and the community college system is like that. I mean, It's got rules.
Right, and it doesn't fit into the normal perceptions that people have of regular school districts. I use, NVUSD as an example because we're all familiar with it, which is a pretty standard top-down system. You have a superintendent, you have a cabinet, you've got people that the superintendent chooses, and it works the way people see most organizations working, whether it's businesses or. But colleges are a whole different animal in that regard.
They are, especially community colleges. We have our own system, own legislative rules, own portions of the Ed Code and Title IX. So there are so many kind of compliance pieces. In California, an additional layer is from the state side. There's a state chancellor's office. And that person is appointed by a board of governors who are appointed by the state's governor. So those are political appointments, and that chancellor serves at the pleasure of those political appointees. So the things that he directs in terms of vision or rules or compliance are from the get-go overladen with some political pressure. And then each of the 114 colleges have their, I shouldn't say that, each of the community college districts, I think it's about 73 or 4,
right,
somewhere in there, have their own locally elected board, like our 7 members, who each bring their own political vantage point. It's a political office. So you have at once, before you ever get to any even issue at a local community college, a lot of political input, both from the national, state chancellor's office, local elected's office, before it ever even gets to the notice of the superintendent president, who's the only employee of the local electeds.
Right. Explain that. That's an interesting point to make. There's a couple of things I want to talk about, but while we're on that the superintendent, the president, is literally the only employee of the elected college board.
That's right. The way that they work in California is the board is elected and generally at large. So there's in our case we have 7 members. They only can operate as a body and not individually. So they have no authority outside of their collective vote. One of the things they do is to hire and monitor their only employee, which is the superintendent president. So that's me. And then every other employee in the entire system is kind of funneled through or works through relationships with the superintendent president.
One of the things that seems to be true with respect to the broader community college system in California, and it seems to filter down to literally each campus on its own, is that the governance is bottom up and top down at the same time. And it creates interesting contradictions in that.
It is, and it may be even a little more complex than that hourglass that you described. But from the top, I mean, to make it simple, you got the local board, and the president is below that. Then it kind of works its way down to the center of this hourglass, and at the bottom, by law, there are some people who have a place at the table. So the faculty have a 10 plus 1, which is there are 10 things in law plus 1 that they have control over, or at least a good deal of influence over. Curriculum, evaluations, hire and fire rights, all of those things. So you could have a good idea from a board, for example. Let's do women's soccer or some other thing. Right. A board member, filtered generally to the president. Good idea. Let's see what we do. At that point in time, since that's a curriculum issue, you have to find a champion from the bottom of that hourglass. Either way you want to look at this, it's not not pecking order. To have this work its way up through a curriculum, and hopefully, and most of the times they kind of meet in the middle for a perfect marriage. And you can kind of work your way through.
And, of course, the overlay to that, as you talked about before, are the curriculum guidelines and rules and regulations that come from the state.
Right. Yeah. There are so many. It's overladen. It's like any system. After a while, there are rules on rules. Right. So there are many countermanded rules. For example, you have to spend 50% of your dollars, for example, on classroom, which overtly is a good rule passed way back in the day to keep classroom teachers in the classroom and provide materials for students. But it didn't anticipate when it was passed any of the distance education or support pieces. So none of those count. So it puts a local district in a very odd position of following the law, but not supporting student success by not putting too much in technology. So it's a kind of an odd duck, as an example, for example.
And talk about all the various players there are within the campus itself in terms of, you mentioned faculty before, but there's the academic faculty, there's the classified employees, there's the various individuals, and then there's the union organization. I mean, there's a lot of different constituencies internally as well. It
is. I think I have used this in the past. The best way to think about it, in a non-pejorative way, he says, is some kind of a Thanksgiving dinner, and at the table, it's a family, and I'll use Napa Valley College as a good example. It's a family. We have our ups and downs, and sometimes loud and not loud folks at any particular dinner, but at the table, you've got labor unions, which is the faculty association,
Right.
and then you have the classified professionals. So those labor unions are there for wage and benefit, and separate important pieces. Then you have faculty senate, which represents the academic interests of the faculty.
As opposed to the wage and benefit interest. Two separate groups, two separate organizations.
Two separate groups, two separate organizations. Right. And then you've got the classified senate, which represents the classified interests in working in campus, and then the administrators, and then the student population, who also have rights and legal rights under the state. Overlaid with that, there's two notions. This can get a little deep, but one is called just participatory decision making. So one says that in the state of California, especially community colleges, it's expected, if you're going to have a good college, to have everybody who's a stakeholder be participating to some extent in a decision. So that makes great sense. For example, if we were going to say, let's don't have smoking on campus. Well, there's a lot of people who want to weigh in. Some people smoke, some people don't. Everybody's got an opinion.
Right.
And it's not something that you would want to do in isolation, either as a president or a board member. So generally speaking, we weigh into that process. I can go on, but I think maybe I don't want to get too layered here for you.
Well, no, I think it's important that people understand that it's a little like turning around, a battleship in a bathtub in some respects, because there are just so many different participants and players and people at that Thanksgiving table that you're talking about.
There are, and so at that Thanksgiving table, there are those players, and each of those players represents tens of people who are not sitting at the table, sometimes hundreds of people who are not sitting at the Thanksgiving table. So the only way that they can get those people voices heard is to create committees. So every community college will have somewhere between 10 and 20, 30 committees, which we do as well. Each committee is made up of one member of each of those family members sitting around. So classified, students, faculty, administrators, and I think maybe I got them all. And so it gets quite complex. Whether you're going out to hire a new person.
Right. I was going to use that as an example.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the hiring process, hiring a new faculty member or hiring a new administrative executive, another cabinet member, a little bit about how that works, because I think the best way to explain it is how it would work for a particular position.
Yeah, and I think it's good. And I think for listeners, it's interesting. If I were listening to this right now, I go, oh my God, this is so complex. But it's different than a small business where you say, just run an ad and take a few resumes and somebody really strikes your fancy and give them a shot, right? Easy, 2 days. Or a week or 2 months even. For a community college, it's a much more layered process. I mean, it's a highly bureaucratic by design, not local design, but by state design.
State design, right.
Yeah. So even to post for, a new faculty member, for example, we have to work on a job description for the faculty member in a participatory way. So they kind of have to agree on it. And here's the nuance that's really important. If you're going to be a successful president, and I would say that anybody who's served more than 3 years at one institution is a successful president. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there. You really need to recognize it in California. You need to reach out to people in a participatory way, even if you could make the decision and just make it. And that's not waffling, it's just respect. So reaching out to our local faculty to say, we are going to hire a new math teacher, for example, or an English or whatever it might be. Right. The committee that selects those people is like the seventh step. There's a JD, a job description that's got to be done.
And that everybody has to buy into.
Right, and agree. that job description flows from a joint committee and instruction that would have approved the hiring of a math person at all versus a chemistry person or a Spanish person or something else, a Spanish teacher, right? So the problem there is that there are so many needs for faculty, but you can't hire an unlimited number. And once you get the JD, then you've got a search, national search, all kinds of rules and regulations flowing down from open access to diversity rules. All those things have to be met. Have to open for a certain amount of weeks. Generally, we will open it for 6 weeks. Close it. Review and screen the initial applicants. Invite, and that reviewing and screening is done by HR. They invite the person to show up for a first interview. That committee is made up of this shared governance, back to the Thanksgiving table. Members who have been selected from that committee. They review the applicants, select a group of people they'd like to see from, say, 30 applied. Well, let's take a look at 8. Then they schedule interviews, same committee. After that committee meets, they forward to yet another committee, finalists. The finalists then do a second round. Then it kind of works its way up. At the end of the day, the president is the person, from our very beginning, right, who would then recommend to the board that we hire this faculty member. That process on a fast track is 4 months plus. That's fast track. Generally, we try to do one big hire a year. So we're in the planning process now. We're just finishing up last year's planning process with the final interviews, and these people will be hired and come on board in August, and then we'll begin the whole thing again anew. So it's not like, gee, yeah, you guys should start some kind of a new green thing and hire a faculty member. Why can't you do that? Well, see me in a year, provided the curriculum is there to support it. And that
everything goes smoothly along the way.
Very smoothly. And then when you don't have a search that yields a candidate at the end of the day, guess what? You have to start all over again and kind of work the process. So,
how efficient is this process? Does it serve the best interests? And this is, I want to emphasize again, this isn't the Napa Valley College process. Right. This is the process for any one of 114 different campuses, or the 70, whatever it is, community college districts. They may all have a slight difference in variation, but essentially the bureaucracy is the bureaucracy. Does it serve the best interests of the institutions?
Yeah, I think 2 questions. I mean, it's incredibly equitable. It's not the most efficient. And that's an important distinction, in that the most efficient way to do something is, like we talked about in small business, just hire somebody. But we're not there. It's equitable in that especially at a small college like Napa Valley, I use the lifeboat example a lot, because you can think about the general institution, which is really big, but an individual department may have, from 2 faculty members to 10 or even more. But the person that we're hiring, if we're using faculty, for example, is the last person in the lifeboat. So this better be a good hire, and they better complement the group that's already there. They need to have some kind of organizational understanding and have a cultural mix in terms of understanding what a rural community college is. People from a great big East Coast college, generally with 40 or 50,000 in it, would have a tougher time being successful. Not that they can't be. But you kind of get the point there, So it's a complication. That's just in hiring. There's,
right.
Yeah.
And there are many other aspects.
Oh my gosh!
To it.
Yeah, you pick the topic, and we'll have an equal and process-laden path.
How frustrating is that to you? The president of any.
That's a good question. And I love being a president. It's really good. Not everybody's cut out for it, because you have to be able to wake up every day and reassess success, if that makes sense. So, without sounding too optimistic about it, I look at student success, and we're doing a really good job. More students are succeeding. The system itself is not holding people back, and it is a bit conservative. People have used, I see some language sometimes Byzantine, sometimes, old and real process laden. But we just celebrated our 75th. There is every assurance, unless something really critical happens in the nation, that we'll be here in another 75 years or more. So when you're looking at that kind of longevity, as opposed to a business entity, any business entity, or even maybe a municipality, the community college has a really strong sense of its longevity. So hiring people, for example, or creating rules or new processes has got to be very well thought out, because it's really a piece of a new system.
Right. I mean, I guess the broader question that I think anybody looking at the Byzantine nature of it would be forced to ask would be, in a world that moves as quickly as ours today, where creative destruction in every business sector is the norm, to what extent does this Byzantine nature hold back progress in some respects? Because it's preventing change from happening at a pace that is consistent with everything that's happening around it.
Well, here's some good news coming your way. Ready? The community college system is the incredibly flexible, nimble organization. So if you're comparing everything we talked about in the last 10 minutes or so with the UCs or state university systems, we are incredibly nimble. Talking about a Byzantine situation, some of the rules and regs, at those systems are unbelievably rigid. We have more flexibility in new curriculum, in adapting to the local needs, than any of those folks do. So that's one of the good things. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Talk about the local needs, because that is an important part of it, and it is an area that is very different from the rest of the UC system.
And, born and raised, I was born and raised in San Diego. So much of the community college system in Southern California revolves around very local needs. So you can find a community college that's along the border, Southwestern Community College. So a lot of their programs are in ESL. A lot of their programs are about international marketing, maquiladoras, small business, all of those things. And no matter where you pick, if you stick a pin in any place in California on the map, and you're really looking at the community college, if you're looking at a Central Valley, you're likely to find high ag.
Right.
Napa's interesting, as we all know, right? I mean, it's at least 2, maybe 3 layered. So it's a destination town for hospitality, tourism. There's a strong business component of that, and then there's the wine industry.
Right.
And underneath that, let me just do that from a vocational side. Those 3, along with healthcare and some manufacturing base, are really what we do here. It would be difficult, I think, to come in here and start a brand new, unrelated curriculum that just didn't make sense for the community at all.
Talk a little bit about the way all of this works as it relates to something like the bond issue, which I touched on in the introduction, that there is a process that it has to go through. I mentioned that, there's been talk about one. There's been attempts in the past that it may or may not wind up on the ballot come November. But again, like hiring, it's not a snap decision that gets made, that it's been going through a process.
Right.
Talk a little about that.
Yeah, it is. It is a process. In California, there's really, in the last 20 years, no way for a college to go out for facilities needs and have them met through the state itself. Right. There's a very small pool. There's unbelievable demand. The lion's share go to K-12s. with a little bit of dollars kind of flowing to the community colleges. So we've had it, for example, one of our buildings in the queue at the state for more than a decade. And we're still a long way out from getting. So, and most community colleges are that way. So it leaves community colleges to address the needs of the local region through a capital facilities bond measure, which is the norm. Mm-hmm. And so that process really is about doing what we talked about, understanding the needs of the community through an educational kind of master plan, linking that to some kind of major facilities master plan, and then looking at the kinds of ways that you could fund that master plan, the facilities. Almost always, unfortunately, it's going to be through a capital campaign, bond campaign. Mm-hmm. That's not undertaken lightly. It's a long process. As you talked about, maybe at the top, there are people who are opposed to taxes for philosophical reasons. And there are people who, for philosophical reasons, love anything that education does. So maneuvering a bond through a local community requires a whole bunch of steps, educating all those constituencies that we talked about around the Thanksgiving table, right. Getting their understanding and input on the facilities themselves, project lists that you would do. A deep understanding of who's designing the chemistry lab, for example. It's not an architect or the president, God forbid. It's a faculty member who works in a chemistry lab who then can give you information.
Right. And that's one of the things that I see, and one of the reasons I thought it was important to have this conversation is that people look at it and want answers right away. Mm-hmm. And it's just inconsistent with the reality of how the system operates. That you can't just say, we're building these buildings, they're going to look like this, we've hired the architect, it's go. This is the budget done.
Right.
That the same as that hiring process is complicated, that this process, even to get it to the point of deciding to do it, is equally complicated.
It's a great parallel. It's the same kind of constituency. At the end of the day, it's the trustees, the board, who have to place such a measure on the ballot. They need enough input to do that, and it's got to work its way through the whole process to understand. And the difference here, as opposed to the other examples that we gave, is there is deep community input. Right. So without getting the voters, if the voters value what the college wants to do in a bond, then they vote to support that. Right. And that's at the bottom of it, that's the base of it.
Right. But what's complicated is, unlike, again, using just the regular school districts as an example, mm-hmm. the process of getting it out there is a much more difficult birthing process than it is with a school district where a couple of people sit down, and maybe it's more than a couple, but a few people sit down and say, this is what we want to do, this is what we're going to go out for, this is what the campaign looks like, let's do it.
Right. The college, by law, and this is good law, I think, we can explore the feasibility of a bond, the college can, linking a future bond to our facilities master plan. What we can't do is, once the measure is brought forward by the board, we can't campaign for it, right, or any of those things. So there's that separation. The process that the board has to go through takes at least a year minimum. And this board and this bond feasibility that we're talking about now for 2018 has been a 25-month, 26-month process. We lost in 2014. We did a little post-mortem, not a little one, but a big post-mortem. Right. Understood, the things that we really did right, and more importantly, the things we did wrong. Corrected those. The need has been consistent along the time, but the important piece is kind of going through those steps so it's surprising anybody. It's not an internal conversation for 2 years. It's been a community conversation for 2 years. Where it really heats up, like any campaign, is the last 4 months or so. So I've had people ask me, are you going out for a bond? And it's like, well, I'm not going out. I'm president, right? Staff is assembling the information, just like our other examples, for the board, and the board at a future meeting, likely in July, will either endorse the idea of that resolution and adopt a resolution to place it on the November ballot, or they will make some other kind of decision. But it's going to have to work its way through that process too.
Talk about what the opportunities are and how it relates to this complexity we've been talking about for funding outside of the traditional bond issue that we're talking about, whether it's public-private partnerships or capital campaigns that the foundation may be involved in, other kind of self-help methods that this campus or other campuses that you've seen can go out and also try and enhance revenue.
Thanks for the question. It's good that Californians generally are starting to lean into these public-private partnerships. The differences between the university system that we talked about before, this is one area where they've been enormously successful, is raising funds for their individual colleges or universities, either through alumni funds. Right. And there's a real sense of affinity with alumni of whatever undergrad you went to or I went to. I went to San Diego State. They sent me a letter, alumni, can we count on you? Well, of course. I'd be happy to, send you $100 a month, for a year, or they'd like it forever, right?
Forever.
But community colleges don't have that history. So there's very few community colleges, just a handful in the state, with an alumni group. So there's been a really interesting kind of function that's happened over the past, I'll call it 5 or 6 years, is public-private partnerships have been encouraged now by the governor of the state, the chancellor's office of the state, and all of the folks who really look at strategic planning and fiduciary responsibility at the state level. So they're strongly encouraging in message after message and paper after paper, and creating legislation that actually makes it more possible for colleges like ours to partner with a builder, for example, on our student housing project. Not in a public-private partnership means that it would not be funded from tax dollars, but through municipal bonds sold throughout the state like every other municipal bond. So there's no dollar cost. We've got the Silverados coming in a public-private partnership. There are many other people who would like to do partnerships. We've talked maybe in the past a little bit about the wine train that would like to do a tech center. The viticulture and winery technology folks, along with our external foundation, are doing a capital fundraising for a new classroom for the winery technology group. All of those kinds of things are great if you look at what they might accomplish over the long term of a facility's master bond, or a bond. They can certainly help to reduce, $10 million from a public-private partnership means $10 million less from a local tax base. So that's a win-win. And we're blessed. Napa Valley is an extremely attractive target and collaborator for business and industry. They'd love to do stuff here in the Valley.
Well, there is also the ability to take advantage, or it seems to me the idea is to take advantage of something you touched on earlier, which was the unique proposition of community college to be involved with the business community, with the local community, to be reflective of what the businesses are and what the needs are in that community.
That is true. And it's it's again two sides. The one side is that we're here to do exactly that. I mean, work with the local community, establish programs that serve the vast majority of the community. There's a couple programs that I would love to be offering that I think would meet some needs in the region, but we're unable to roll those out because through legislation and non-competes, we can't compete with our adjacent community colleges and offer the same thing. So for good reason. I mean, so for example, there's a really wonderful automotive program at Solano. And they
just built this whole new building, I think.
They do a great job over there. And, what sense would it make for us to be spending dollars to create another one for our community, even though it's a little closer? In the same kind of things for SRJC, if you're going up to Sonoma. So there are also rules, yet another group of people at the Thanksgiving table, which are your competing surrounding schools. So even though we'd like to do something, we can't sometimes without permission from our neighboring schools. And guess what? Sometimes that takes 2 or 3 years for them to cycle and get back to you.
We've talked a little about how you, as the president, balance all this. How does it work for the board? Talk a little bit about how those individuals that are elected to the Board of Trustees both understand and balance all of these competing interests.
I have a unique perspective on that question. I served for 12 years as an elected trustee in Southern California. I was very lucky to have served on Grossmont Cuyamaca. I was president of the board. Inside the college, everything rises and falls on a board meeting from a president's office. So we start preparing for the next board meeting the day after the one we had the Thursday evening, and assembling all the information that a board needs to do. A board meeting, and a lot of people don't recognize this from the outside, a board meeting is a business meeting among the 7 members of the board to conduct the business necessary to keep the college operational, which is open to the public to view. And that is quite different than, say, a city council meeting or something else where it's like, let's talk about a real valid thing that might be related to the college, but it's not related to the business of the college. So trustees get a monthly package. They're expected to read anywhere between 100 and 1,000 pages of information, which they can't. Nobody can. Trustees also in California are lay people primarily, which means they don't have expertise in higher education. Many board members don't have expertise in layered politics, or certainly not processes. Mm-hmm. So when you come in as a new board member, it's like going into the anti-submarine warfare unit in San Diego. There's a ton of abbreviation. There's a whole budgeting process. There's rules and regulations and all kinds of things. And this piece that you talked about, behind the curtain, there is no attempt in any possible way for the board or the president or the college to obscure anything. In fact, that's the whole system of it. It's completely open. But where people get frustrated, and sometimes board members, is, can you tell me why the police cars that you're buying have a black back seat? Or have 4 doors rather than 2 doors. Right. And it gets into the minutia rather than a policy kind of description, which is the police need cars.
Right. I mean, there's an interesting irony in there that part of the transparency and the fact that it is so transparent is what creates a lot of the confusion.
Right.
And a lot of what people don't understand.
Right.
Because it's like the public getting to see the family at that Thanksgiving table and then thinking, this is a really dysfunctional family and I don't want to have anything to do with them. We're never coming back here at all. Yeah. When in fact, that's just the way the family works.
I love this analogy that we're landing on because it's really true. So if you have that monthly meeting of the board, which is the Thanksgiving table, when, if you will, if there's a knock at the door and a neighbor is coming over and wants to complain about something, the rules and processes and law that govern how that Thanksgiving table can operate or how our board can operate is under the Brown Act, and then a whole bunch of policies and regulations that, guess what, are passed by the board through the participatory governance process we talked about.
Right.
So somebody will say, for example, and I heard this quite recently, they come to open session and they address something that's not on the agenda. And it's like, are you going to respond to me? Well, the answer is no, because we can't by law respond to you. It's not an agenda item. If we respond to you as a board on something you just brought up from the floor, we didn't agendize that, so therefore we are now breaking the Brown Act. Right. And people they get frustrated with that, which is, well, there must be something going on here. And it is a very complex piece of business. So back to your other question, part of the role of the president being successful is to keep it all moving in a seamless way. Sometimes it's not perfect, but keeping your eye on the ball in terms of student success is everything that we're doing going to advance the vision and mission of the college. And then there are 100 other questions behind every decision.
Right. And it's important, I suppose, and this is maybe a good way to bring it to a close, is to keep in mind that vision and mission, and that all of this process, as Byzantine or as ironic or as confusing as it may be, does have a point.
It does. I mean, we are, again, here's the good news. The California Community College system is the most successful system on the planet. So we are, with all that we've talked about, it works. We serve more students than any other system in the world in California. We do it in a way that is very cost effective in comparison to the UCs, which are 5 times or more per student. And so you really, if you take a step back and you're saying, is there transparency here? Yes. Is there a process here? Yes. The answer is really, we continue year after year after year to widen this funnel, if you will, for student success, and it works. Actually, students are working their way through certificates and degrees, some to transfer, some to work, and it's doing exactly what it was set up to do.
More than that, we can't ask, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Dr. Ron Kraft, I thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you. It's great to
I
talk.
hope we've shed some light on some of this for folks.
Thanks.
NAPAbroadcasting.com, the online radio home of Napa Valley College.